Hey, what's up? So we're starting off with the early 2000s, from 2000 to 2007. This was basically its own little golden age of cinema. Movie theater attendance was at its all-time high. Masterpieces were dropping left and right. For example, just in the year 2000, we got Memento, Gladiator, American Psycho, Requiem for a Dream, In the Mood for Love. Those are all certified classics. 2001, this might be my all-time favorite year for movies. We got Spirited Away, Monsters, Inc., Shrek. It's pretty much the most stacked year for animated movies of all time. We've also got Ocean's 11, Donnie Darko, Legally Blonde, Royal Tenenbaum, and on top of that, both of my top two favorite movies of all time came out in 2001. The first one is Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring. This is one of those movies that makes you feel nostalgic for a life you've never lived. Because obviously it's a complete made-up fantasy world, but it does such a good job of immersing you into the Shire. Once you find out that it's all under threat from this asshole Dark Lord, it almost feels like it's your own childhood home that's under threat. And I love how in this movie, once the hobbits leave the Shire, the journey just gets progressively more and more dangerous as it goes along. It has everything you could ever want. It's got mythical fantasy creatures, magical forests, it's got friendship, betrayal. I just think this is the ultimate adventure movie. Oh yeah, and another thing I love about this movie is that even with all these world-ending stakes, the whole world is going to shit, the movie is still reminding you to enjoy the little things in life. They're always just periodically finding beauty in the world. I love that about it. Fellowship of the Ring easily goes into the Hall of Fame. Mulholland Drive. This is my other favorite movie of all time. And one of the craziest things about it is that it originally started off as a canceled TV pilot, and then David Lynch just casually repurposed it into the greatest portrayal of dream logic in cinema history. You know how when you're dreaming and it feels completely real while you're in it, but then you wake up and you realize that the entire thing was just really bizarre and incoherent sequence of events? Mulholland Drive captures that feeling perfectly. But the thing that really makes it work as a story is that, yeah, even though the entire thing is basically just incoherent dream logic, everything that happens in the movie directly informs you about the psychology of the character. So it's basically using dream logic as a vehicle for a character study. Oh yeah, and every scene is just really entertaining in its own right. Mulholland Drive goes into the Hall of Fame. By the way, this right here might be the best 1-2 punch combo for experiencing the magic of cinema. Because you got Lord of the Rings, which transports you to a new world. Then you got Mulholland Drive, which allows you to experience someone else's dream while you're awake. Movies like this remind you of why art is so important, because it's simply the only way that you can have experiences like that. 2002, this was the peak of movie theater attendance, the peak of cinema. You had Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, Punch Drunk Love, City of God, Scooby-Doo. And yeah, I would say that the rest of the early 2000s were pretty much a continuation of the golden age of cinema. We're not quite into the dark ages yet. For example, these were pretty much the glory days of comedy movies. You had School of Rock, Mean Girls, Wedding Crashers, 40-Year-Old Virgin, Talladega Nights, The Devil Wears Prada, Hot Fuzz, Superbad, Spider-Man 3. I mean, yeah, Spider-Man 3 is not technically a comedy, but you're telling me that this is not one of the most unintentionally funny movies? And as far as which of these comedies is the best, it's pretty much completely subjective. Remember, this is just my taste in movies. You probably disagree with a lot of my picks. Personally speaking, my top two are School of Rock and Mean Girls. School of Rock because, I mean, honestly, I'm just a pretty big classic rock fan, but also Jack Black is an absolute force of nature in this movie. And also Mean Girls because it has basically a perfect script. And also Regina George and Gretchen Wieners, in my opinion, are in the pantheon of all-time great movie characters. There's also plenty of other cinematic masterpieces to come out of this era. You've got Old Boy, Kill Bill, Pirates of the Caribbean. You've also got Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, Pride and Prejudice, Pan's Labyrinth, The Departed, The Prestige. And then to cap off this era in 2007, we got two all-time masterpieces in the same year, No Country for Old Men and There Will Be Blood. And by the way, There Will Be Blood definitely makes it into the Hall of Fame because, yeah, it's this epic story about capitalism versus religion. It's pretty much a masterpiece in every single aspect of filmmaking. But my favorite part of the movie is just how unhinged these characters are and the whole personal feud between them. That and the fact that Daniel Day-Lewis gave arguably the greatest acting performance of all time.
Across the room.
There Will Be Blood is easily a Hall of Fame movie. 2008, and now we're entering into a new era, the superhero era. And this era began because of two specific movies. The first one is The Dark Knight, still probably the greatest superhero movie ever made. This gave a lot of legitimacy to the superhero genre. I mean, Heath Ledger was so good in this movie that even your fucking grandma was a fan of this. And then the other movie that started the superhero era was Iron Man. Because, I mean, yeah, this is what started the MCU.
Actually, the superhero era started way before that.
Okay, yes, technically speaking, the superhero genre goes way back before 2008. Technically, you could argue that the Richard Donner Superman movies are what began the superhero era, or even the fucking Adam West Batman movie. But I feel like from 2008 all the way up to Avengers Endgame in 2019, that's when the superhero genre was really dominating cinema. Basically just phases 1 through 3 of the MCU. Depending who you ask, these were either the final years of the golden age of cinema, or it was the beginning of the dark ages. And that's not even just because of superhero movies. Theater tickets started getting way more expensive. The box office was getting dominated with remakes and sequels. Streaming services started taking over the film industry. For the record, I'm not saying this was all a bad thing, because like a lot of those franchise movies and sequels and all that were actually just really great movies. For example, you got Blade Runner 2049, Mad Max Fury Road, Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, Guardians of the Galaxy, The Hunger Games Catching Fire, Logan, Thor Ragnarok, Black Panther, Into the Spider-Verse, Avengers Infinity War. Those are all great movies. And to be fair, even during this time when it was all these IP movies and franchise movies that were dominating at the box office, there still were also just a pretty wide variety of masterpieces. For example, The Social Network. I will defend this movie against any haters. I mean, obviously, Mark Zuckerberg is kind of a piece of shit. Obviously, Facebook is a cesspool of an app, but this is still one of the most well-made movies I've ever seen. Even if the supposedly based on a true story movie is actually just completely fictional, I mean, like they were just taking a lot of creative liberties with what happened in real life, I still think it's one of the best cinematic representations of the cultural shift that has happened in the 21st century, specifically the old establishment getting upended by these tech bros and social media and all that stuff. Half the movie is basically these old Ivy League douchebags getting usurped by these new tech bro Silicon Valley douchebags. And yeah, sure, the movie is a little bit outdated in some ways. It was also kind of ahead of its time. And it's also just such an entertaining movie. It's got one of the most quotable scripts of all time. It's got David Fincher's perfectionist directing style. And it's got one of the greatest musical scores of all time from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. So yeah, The Social Network goes into the Hall of Fame. And the rest of the 2010s was stacked with masterpieces. You've got Inception, The Master, Prisoners, Wolf of Wall Street, Whiplash, What We Do in the Shadows, Sicario, Arrival, First Reform, Get Out, Burning, Hereditary, Climax, Phantom Thread. I mean, most of those movies could eventually make it into my personal Hall of Fame. I would have to rewatch them to double check, but either way, those are all fantastic movies. And I haven't even gone to 2019 yet. A lot of people consider this as one of the best years for movies ever, and I can see why, because this year was absolutely stacked. You've got Portrait of a Lady on Fire, The Lighthouse, 1917, Knives Out, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I also have to mention Avengers Endgame and Joker. Even if they're not my personal favorite movies, those are some of the biggest cultural phenomenons of the 21st century. And then there's my top 2 movies of 2019. Parasite and Uncut Gems. I already anointed Parasite as the movie of the decade for the 2010s, and I stand by that because I just think it's one of the most well-made and entertaining movies of all time. I just think it's one of those movies that even 100 years from now, people will still be watching Parasite. I think it's going to stand the test of time as one of the all-time classics. It's just so rare for a movie to hook you in as effectively as Parasite does. I mean, this movie basically forces you to lock in 100% just because of how entertaining it is and how perfectly the story unfolds. And it's just such a layered and thematically rich movie. It's one of those movies that you can rewatch it multiple times and pick up new things every single time you watch it. Parasite easily goes into the Hall of Fame. Uncut Gems. And this is somewhat of a divisive movie. Apparently, a lot of people really don't like it. And my theory for why a lot of people kind of hate Uncut Gems is because of the sound design. The movie purposely has so much overlapping audio going on. You just have all of these characters with heavy New York accents interrupting each other, talking over each other. And then on top of that, you also have this really loud and super unique score by Oneohtrix Point Never. Plus, a lot of the movie is shot on handheld camera. And I feel like all of these things kind of come together and subconsciously make it a very unpleasant movie to watch for a lot of people. It's not a coincidence that so many people come out of this movie just talking about how stressful and anxiety inducing it is. I can definitely see why the movie is off-putting for a lot of people, but those are all the things that I love so much about this movie. That and just how entertaining it is to watch the chaos of this gambling addict just go down a rabbit hole and just keep on playing with fire. Uncut Gems easily goes into the Hall of Fame. 2020 is probably the worst year in the history of cinema for obvious reasons. The entire film industry pretty much shut down. But on top of that, this is also when streaming services started to really take over the film industry. And then to make matters worse, a few years later, now we have a bunch of AI tech bros trying to replace art with AI slop. At this point, it is undeniably the dark ages of cinema. I will say though, as bad as 2020 was, at least we got the movie Shiva Baby. That's actually a pretty good movie. I really like that one. It's kind of got the whole anxiety thing going on like Uncut Gems, except it's a Rachel Sennett comedy. It's a solid movie. You should watch it. 2021. And yeah, this was another pretty terrible year for movies, but at least we did get Dune Part 1. 2022, and now cinema is back, sort of. Unfortunately, movie theaters have still not recovered back to where they were at in 2019. Honestly, they're probably never going to get back to that level again, which that kind of sucks. But the good news is that there were a lot of amazing movies to come out between 2022 and 2024. For example, Godzilla Minus One, Oppenheimer, Anora, Furiosa, Challengers, Dune Part 2. Which, by the way, Dune Part 2 is one of the best theatrical experiences I've ever had. I've already rewatched Dune 2 countless times by now, and every single time I get so hyped up whenever they go to that freaky ass gladiator arena. Okay, yeah, honestly, most of the appeal of Dune 2 is just watching Paul Atreides aura farming with these epic speeches and these insane action scenes. But I've always loved Frank Herbert's commentary on the dangers of charismatic leaders, and also the way that he portrays these different forms of authoritarianism. For example, the Atreides use charisma, diplomacy, and borderline cult of personality to accumulate power. The Bene Gesserit, on the other hand, they use religious propaganda and secrecy. Then you've got the Harkonnens, and they just use brute force. They're basically just like North Korea on steroids. I just think Dune is a really fascinating story. I love the way Denis Villeneuve adapted it, and it's just really cool to see all of those ideas packaged into a really accessible blockbuster movie. Dune Part 2 goes into the Hall of Fame. 2025, and okay, yeah, kind of a garbage year for humanity, but it was actually a really good year for cinema. I would say that this was actually probably the best year for movies since 2019. We've got No Other Choice, Begonia, Weapons, One Battle After Another, and my top two favorite movies of 2025, Sinners and Marty Supreme. Both of those are movies that have a chance to make it into my Hall of Fame later down the line. I would have to let them sit with me for a little bit longer, rewatch them a few more times, but I think they are really great movies. And if I have to pick one between the two as my favorite of the year, I would have to go with Sinners. Now, I'm going to get a bunch of anti-Sinners activists coming after me, but I don't really care. I just love the movie. Don't get me wrong. I don't think Sinners is a perfect movie. It can get a little bit schlocky at times, but I actually kind of love that about the movie. But I also think that it reaches some of the highest highs out of any movie I've seen in years. For starters, the movie's commentary on assimilation and how blues music was essentially stolen and just how they represented all that through vampirism. I mean, it's just extremely interesting. And it's just such a fun movie to watch. I've already seen it 3 times by now and it hasn't gotten old at all. A lot of that is because it has probably some of the best musical numbers I've ever seen. And it has an extremely charismatic ensemble cast. So yeah, I stand by my initial theatrical reaction to Sinners. I think it's an instant classic. And again, you don't have to agree with me. This is just my taste in movies. The real point that I want to make is, even though that this is a pretty bad time for cinema, and let's be honest, the world is just kind of going to shit in general, there still are a lot of amazing movies coming out, and even if times are kind of hard right now, I still think it's important to enjoy the little things in life, even if it's just something simple like watching a good movie. Anyway, check out this video right here if you want to see a breakdown on the most insufferable types of movie fans.